We'd like to thank the Ogden School Foundation for providing this wonderful opportunity for our Ogden School District students and teachers, and for all the other things they do to help enhance the educational opportunities for the students and teachers in our district. At this point, I'd like to turn the time over to Pam Nelson, the president of the Ogden School Foundation.
Thanks, Heather. I appreciate that. I feel right at home when I stand up here at this podium. I know we have 3 high schools here, but I am an Ogden Tiger through and through. Yay! And it is a class from a long time ago, so I won't even tell you the year. But I do remember it, so that's a good sign. We are thrilled to be here today, and I am very happy to have the honor to speak to you for just a minute and to tell you just a little bit about what has transpired in the last 24 hours. I don't know how much background you have, but every year the Ogden School Foundation has a major fundraiser, and we invite the people of Ogden to attend a gala at the Ogden Eccles Conference Center, and we just look everywhere throughout the nation for best-selling authors. And every year an author enters Ogden, Utah. They present a wonderful evening of entertainment for the people of Ogden. And last night, that's what happened. We have arriving from Florida on Wednesday, Miss Sue Monk Kidd, who is a world-renowned author, and you are very lucky today to hear her. And she has graced us with her charm and her intelligence and her expertise in writing, and did an amazing event last night for a sold-out crowd of well over 1,200 people. Now, I know you can clap on that one because it was good. Now, the thing that is so amazing about this event is all the money that is raised from that event goes to you and your teachers. That's our purpose. And that's our mission, is to enhance your education as the Ogden School Foundation. So we are pleased today to have Miss Kidd here with us, and she will offer to you the most delightful next hour, because she has so much wisdom and knowledge, and she will give to you just the little touches that you need in helping you along with your careers. Now, as is tradition, along with this event, students competed in a writing contest as part of our fall author event. This year, students were asked, what are the implications of misunderstanding the complicated lives in our diverse society? Now, I read that and I thought, wow, that's a mouthful of words. And yet, we had almost 220 of you that took that title and chose to write on it. Thank you to all of you students who did that, to all of the teachers who asked, I was going to say forced, graded their teachers in doing this, and the finalists were judged by Weber State University English professors. We have the student winners seated over here on the stage with us today, and we'd like to recognize each one of them now. They attended the banquet last night, they attended with their parents, and it was just charming to be able to meet them and call them up on stage in front of all these people. To help us do that, we invite Sue Monk Kidd, Superintendent Rich Nye, and Mrs. Janice Voss to come forward, because each winner today will be presented with a signed copy of The Secret Life of Bees. And just to let you know, this title of what they wrote on came from the book, The Secret Life of Bees, because we talked about the complicated actions that go on in a beehive. So they've taken that and they've put it into their daily lives. So, winners, listen for your names. All right, Ben Lomond High School, it's your turn. We have winners from Ben Lomond High School. First winner is Blake Jones. Adea Lucero. Rachel Mann, and Dylan Marshall. From George Washington High School, Miranda Trujillo. Oh, I'm right in those pictures. From Ogden High School, we have Micaiah Gentry. Casey Kamagaki. Jacob Malakowski. Oh, we love personality. Caitlin Norton. And Jordan Sweeten. Yay, Jordan. While Jordan is getting her picture taken, would all of you join together in congratulating these phenomenon winners of this year's contest? Now, all of these people seated on the stage want to enjoy the next hour as much as you do. So I'm going to ask, we all get to leave the stage, and I am going to turn the time over to Sarah Voss, who will have the privilege and the pleasure of introducing Miss Kidd to all of you. Sarah is a professor at Weber State University in the English department. So we'll turn the time over to Sarah. Thanks, guys.
Last night I was able to stand in front of over 1,000 people and introduce one of my most favorite writers, Mrs. Sumant Kidd. It's my good fortune to be able to introduce her to you today at my alma mater, Ogden High School. As I stand in this beautiful auditorium, I can recall the many special memories that I have of this school. One of those being the friendships that I formed and kept through my years in the Ogden School District. I also recall classes that put me on a path to becoming a teacher of reading and writing. Those classes were my English classes, where I was introduced to good, even great, and life-changing literature. Last night, Miss Kidd spoke about a fire that burns in each person, a passion that pushes each one of us to pursue things that matter to us and share those things with others. Because I have parents, and teachers who taught ideas similar to the one Mrs. Kidd shared, I have had my life changed through messages, characters, and words written by many authors, but especially by Mrs. Kidd. For those of you who were here last year and heard Anthony Dorr speak, you might remember something he said about writing, which I will share with you, and which I also believe describes our honored guest today. He said, "Novels, I believe, are uniquely qualified to offer compassion, empathy, and attentiveness. In a good novel, openness is inherent. The lesson of every single one of my favorite novels is this: the truth is more complicated than I thought. Reading and writing stories is not, despite appearances, about spending lots of time with oneself. It's about learning to look beyond self, beyond the ego, to enter lives and other worlds. It's about honing one's empathy so that a story might bridge the gap between the personal and the communal." End of quote. Standing here on this stage today takes me back to a moment in time when I watched one of my very best friends perform the role of Miss Adelaide in the production of Guys and Dolls. She was a star who shone most brightly as she sang and danced on this stage nearly 20 years ago. Almost 3 years ago this month, this light in my life, Lindsay, lost her heroic fight to cancer. Days before she died, I was able to sit at her bedside and read to her. For some reason, I chose to read Sue Monk Kidd's book, The Invention of Wings, over any of the other books that I love. I guess I didn't know what to do as I sat at her bedside. She was so weak and a shell of the girl who stood on this stage and captured the hearts of many. Something in the words of this novel brought peace to both me and Lindsay in what was otherwise a hard, sad time. Although we didn't have time to finish the book before she passed, reading this book to my dear friend just the night before she left us was one of the most important moments in my life. As a teacher of reading and writing, I know that the famous words spoken by Mr. Keating in Dead Poet Society are true, that words and ideas can change the world and can change each one of us. Mrs. Kidd's books have changed my life, along with dozens of my students who have shared in the incredible experience of reading her books. Please join me now in welcoming Sue Monk Kidd, and please listen to the words she will speak to you today. There is a message that each one of you needs to hear and feel, because Mrs. Kidd's writing is universal and speaks to ideas that each one of us should and need to take into our hearts. Mrs. Kidd.
Okay, well, I am so excited to be able to kind of get this discussion going and interview Ms. Kidd. I also just want to take a minute and say how impressed I am with you students. You guys came in, you all just calmed right down, and I can tell that you are really excited to hear her talk about her work and her passion for writing, and I think that that's a wonderful thing. You guys are really making my heart so proud right now. So thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say all of your books feel so personal. And I know that when our students, all of our 11th graders read The Secret Life of Bees this year, and I know that they felt that too, and they were especially moved by Lily's story. Can you start by telling us how Lily came to be and why you felt it was so important to write a young character who experienced such significant loss?
Lily appeared in my imagination one day when I was remembering growing up in a little town in Georgia. I grew up in a town called Sylvester, Georgia, population 3,000. And I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s is when I went to high school in the 60s and then on to college. But in this little town, we had a house that had bees that lived in one of the walls. They took up in the wall and lived there for about 19 years. They would come every year and they would make honey in the wall. And the sound was incredible. I mean, if you walked in this room, which we turned into a guest bedroom, by the way, if you walked in there, I mean, it was a hum going on all the time. And if you put your hand on the wall, it would vibrate. So I grew up with bees in the wall. It literally part of our family. We couldn't get rid of them. My father tried everything. And so finally we just made our peace and just welcomed them into the family, and I grew up with the bees. And we kept the door closed because they could come out of the walls. All right, with this memory in my mind, when I decided I wanted to write fiction and I was thinking about my first novel, I remembered those bees. And I remember closing my eyes, and an image came to me of a girl. She looked about 14 years old. She was lying in bed in her bedroom. It was the same room that these bees were in my mind. And the bees were coming out of the cracks in the wall, a whole swarm of them, and they were flying around in the room. And she was lying there watching the bees in just sort of encapsulated in this incredible sound. That's how the novel started. I was captivated by that image. And so I started wondering, well, who is this girl that's taken up in my imagination, and what does she want? And that's really the central question in a novel. What does my character want? Because that propels the whole story forward. So once I decided this girl was named Lily and she wanted her mother, I was ready to start writing. And so the reason Lily is 14 is only because she showed up that way for me. And I think in a way, you know, it was not just random at all that she showed up in my imagination that way. It was because something deep inside of me wanted to write the story of a 14-year-old girl in 1964 who is dealing with abuse, displacement, a lost mother, a terrible betrayal, a terrible wound, and a guilt. And I wanted to see if we could take her on a journey toward healing. And I wanted it to be a backdrop against civil rights. I wanted to deal with race and race relations in this book. And so I'm sure all of those things were in me, and that's why she showed up that way. And you know, someone asked me once, what is a novel? I mean, what a question. That was the question. What is a novel? And I said, well, you just take a bad situation and make it worse. That's a novel. And there's some truth in that, but the part that I didn't say is that you try to unravel that toward the end and resolve it the best you can, or at least partially. And so Lily's situation, there was a loss, and and the situation got worse, and yet she found redemption and she found healing.
Thank you. So talking about some of maybe the experiences that you had growing up, did you draw on any of those from the civil rights movement? Because you're originally from Georgia, South Georgia. Were there any specific experiences you used from your life to draw upon for the writing of this novel?
There were many experiences I drew on. Mostly what I was drawing on was something broad about having been a witness to a time in our nation that had incredible racial divides. In 1963-64, I witnessed some pretty terrible things in this little town in Georgia where I was growing up. I was about Lily's age. So I was writing a story about a girl in 1964 who was about my age. And I was remembering what it was like to be a freshman in high school against the backdrop of what was going on. I graduated from the very first integrated high school in my county, and it was a very tumultuous experience. And every single day I watched 3 very brave African American students come to school, put their chins up, walk down the corridor while kids cruelly balled up notebook paper and threw at them. It was heartbreaking for me to watch this. And when I befriended one of them, I got the balled up notebook paper too. So it was this kind of time. And, you know, something about that stayed in me, and I wanted to be a witness to some of that. I did put pieces of that throughout the book that were actual experiences that I had. There are lots of experiences in that book, little things usually having to do with Lily that I borrowed from my own life. You know, in the 7th grade, Lily, her science project was a fallout shelter. Now, I don't even know if you know what a fallout shelter is, but if you know your history, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, everybody was making a fallout shelter in case Russia the Soviet Union at the time dropped a bomb. So about half of my class built fallout shelters for their science project. Well, that's what Lily did. So I borrowed things like this from my own life that I knew were contemporary to the times and put in the novel too.
Mm-hmm. There's a moment in the novel where you can kind of sense that Lily it's her first experience being discriminated against from the Boatwright sisters when June is, she doesn't welcome her with open arms like August does. Did that ever happen to you in any way when you were growing up? Did you ever feel that discrimination from African Americans, and did it surprise you?
No, I can't say that I really did. I think there was some wariness I felt. And I think that was natural and expected.
Yeah.
I think if I had been African American in 1964, or maybe even in 2017, I might be wary as well sometimes if you're in a situation where the majority is white and you're not sure of their motives or where they're coming from, and it's particularly against the backdrop of what was going on then. So I did experience that, but during that particular time in the South, and I was in the deep South, it was very typical to have nannies, housekeepers that were African American. And they came to work in white uniforms, and they sat in the back seat of the car and were driven around town. I have very distinct memories of all of this. And it was very confusing for a kid to try to understand what was going on because it resonates wrong in you, and yet the adult world is supporting this, the culture is supporting this, and it's a very odd time. My family had an African American housekeeper. I happened to adore her, and I think the feeling was mutual. But there's a line in The Secret Life of Bees that I put in there very purposefully, and when they were making the movie, I had a small consulting role with the script writer, and I just insisted that this line be in there. But it's when August is talking to Lily, and she's talking about her past, that she was once her mother's housekeeper. And she said, Lily was confused, well, did you love me like I thought did you love my mother like I thought you loved my mother? And August is saying to her, that is a very confusing time, and love was hard it was hard because I was the housekeeper, and she was the one who hired me, and it wasn't equal. And love is never equal in these situations sometimes. It's a very confusing and complex kind of relationship. So I think that was true for me, and I always tried to sort it out,
One of our students came up with a question. He asked, even though you were raised in a prejudiced state, how did you learn to shut off those prejudices?
To shut off those prejudices in myself or in other around me, or?
Probably both.
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all kind of harbor some prejudice in us. We make judgments about people without even knowing why. I'm not sure why we do this. I think it's probably out of fear. Most things that are the opposite of love are about fear. But I believe that by the time I was around 15, I could understand what an incredible injustice was being done. There was a lot of violence being done, and this kind of injustice was beginning to really upset me. And it's like a child, an adolescent, comes to a moment of awareness where your consciousness kicks in and you go, I know I'm raised in this culture, and this seems to be the way things are, but it's going against the grain of my soul. I know this isn't right. Now, what are you going to do about that? And so I grew up in a family. My grandfather was a judge. He was the city court judge for 30 years. And he had a sense of justice that I think was pervasive in my family. And I was supported by a family that seemed to, they supported civil rights. And they were, I think, on the cusp of that culture this way. And if my family erred, it was to be silent, because of the ostracism. And so for me then to speak up in high school became interesting, really became interesting. And there was a cost in that. But to speak truth, there usually is a cost if it's coming from love. And so, I had to learn to do that. It was hard, and I wasn't perfect at it, but I tried my best. When you see prejudice around you, I think you have to make a judgment whether to call that out and how to call that out, and how to approach that so that it's not exacerbated, but you can find some common ground to talk about it. But it needs to be talked about. It really does. And I think in this climate in 2017, the need to voice these things is really important, especially around race.
Yeah, I think our students are very concerned. They want to have those tough conversations. And so I think that's wonderful advice for them, because any chance they get, they want to talk about examples from their lives and how they can help in the future as well. So you mentioned that you had a small role in the film in helping with the screenwriting. Is there an actor or an actress that you felt really became one of your characters?
I actually loved the movie, and this is rare for a writer to like the movie of their book. Trust me, most of the adaptations of books often don't turn out well, and sometimes the author is not too sure about it. In this case, I think I was really lucky because the director was also the screenwriter, and she really got this book. And she wanted me to work with her, and she was so gracious to let me throw my 2 cents in all the time. And it was often Gina and I, her name is Gina Prince Bythewood, the two of us sort of trying to take a stand against the studio, who was, they have a bottom line, and we were about the art, and it was always interesting. My role was small, but what was the question again?
You're fine. Was there a character that you felt really was...
Right, the character. Yeah, Sue, come on.
You're fine.
The character that I thought was probably became one of my characters was Sophie Okonedo, who played the character of May. She was amazing to me. I mean, I thought they were all really good, and when they asked me, one of the producers asked me early on about casting, believe me, they didn't take my advice, but they did ask me, who do you think you would like to see play the character of Rosaline? And I said, what about Queen Latifah? And I thought she would have been an amazing Rosaline, and they did cast her as August, which was really kind of brilliant and smart and the right thing to do. And I thought Jennifer Hudson was amazing as Rosaline. I loved how they all portrayed, but Sophie Okonedo became May, and I think that was the most difficult role to pull off.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's see. So your writing is full of very strong women. Why do you think creating assertive female characters is important?
Well, we need stories about real women being brave, being courageous, being themselves, being their true selves, having their voice in the world. We need that because that has been missing a lot in our culture, and no fault of their own often. But I think stories are so incredibly important in showing us what's possible in the world. That's how we know. The real way we change culture, in my mind, is through story. Now, you can legislate a lot of things, and that's very important. We need to come at it from all kinds of ways. But if you want to change culture, you change the hearts of people. And the fastest way to a human heart is a story. And so if we can tell stories about women overcoming and women finding their voice, then maybe we can embolden women to say, that's possible in my life. And not just women, but all people. But I think I have a particularly soft spot for that because of what my own experience. Again, growing up in the 50s and 60s when women were very limited, incredibly limited. And because of that, I think we still have gender inequities that still have to be addressed, just like we still have racial inequities. So we need stories about them.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of that. Just on a personal note, I have 3 young daughters, and so I feel like you said, I mean, stories provide the empathy, and they provide examples for readers to say, you know, I can do this, I can accomplish these things. Lily shows attachment to many objects, particularly her mother's belongings, like her gloves and the whale pin that she gets. How do tangible objects or symbols help you make sense of life or trials?
Well, I think they're very important for us to have these touchstones in our lives that help us. One of the reasons I put the wall, this wailing wall, so to speak, in the story was for this very reason. You know, to have a concrete object in the story where someone can go and see that object and connect it to a very significant meaning, and then it resonates for them. You know, I believe in symbols, and I do load my books with all kinds of symbols, and because they come so copiously to me as I'm writing, I want to be able to speak to a kind of subconscious way to the reader. And so the whale pen, this wall, they give the reader a way to understand something in the novel that they might not understand, and to take away a meaning from it. You know, I've heard of high schools, they have written to me all across the country about creating walls in the library or on the school grounds.
Oh, really?
As a place for students to come and place their pain, to place things that are on their heart that are too heavy for them to carry. So they let the stones carry it. They let the wall hold it. I've had therapists, psychologists create these walls in their offices. It's been really eye-opening and amazing to me to see how just a concrete thing like that in a story can become real in people's lives. And there's a hospital in New York that created a wall in one of the rooms, in a room that students have access to. Patients have access to. And it's full of little notes where they place some of their pain or heaviness. And it's a way to ritualize it. And we need places like this, you know, where we can, someone helps us deal with it. It helps us to process things. So that was really amazing. I'll just say one other thing, because I'm on the wall now, but I built a wall for my parents on their farm for my parents' 90th birthday. And I asked them, what do you want for your 90th birthday? My father's like, well, we have everything. What do we need at 90, you know? And I said, but you don't have a wall. And he said, well, I'd like a wall then. And so my brothers and I built this serpentine stone wall for them. And they are 96 now, and they get in their golf cart and they drive down to the wall. And every day they write their prayers on a little piece of paper and tuck it in the crevices of this wall. So it can be meaningful, you know, to have these experiences like that.
Yeah, and I know so much of our lives are intangible on social media or using technology, and so having those touchstones, like you said, is so important for us to reconnect with ourselves. So there's so many mother figures in The Secret Life of Bees. Did you have any inspiration from real life figures? You mentioned that you had a housekeeper, a nanny. Were there any other people that inspired you and you kind of created your characters from them?
I would say that most of my characters in The Secret Life of Bees were completely conjured out of my imagination except for one. And you know, and I say that, but it's not entirely true, because there isn't a pure character that's completely created strictly out of the imagination that has nothing to do with people around you. You borrow little things, and there might be a composite of people in one character or a trait here or there, and that's probably true of all my characters. I mean, there's a lot of traits of myself in Lily, you know, actually. But the character that I really modeled was Rosaline, and that was on the housekeeper that I mentioned earlier. Except Rosaline in the book is much more, well, she's a fiercer character than our housekeeper, whose name was Grovina. But she was very like her and looked like her, and so I think that would be the closest one. The one that is the most unlike anyone I know is probably August.
Do you ever feel so connected to your characters or a story that it's hard for you to see the novel end?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, especially this book. I got very blue when I finished writing this book, because I missed hanging out with August, May, June, Lily, and all the daughters of Mary. I just missed them so much. I had been with them for 3.5 years writing this novel, and suddenly, the book was over and sent away, and I wasn't able to be with them every day in my imagination in this very intimate way that they became very real to me.
Yeah.
And I kind of got down for several weeks, and my husband finally said, well, I know what you need. You need a dog. So we went and bought a dog, and I named the dog Lily, and this little black lab puppy became my therapy. And so Lily stayed with me in my study when I was writing all the time. She was my companion, and I adored her. And she lived to be 12 years old, and actually died just a couple of years ago when I was on book tour for my last novel, The Invention of Wings. So I miss her. But I have a new one in my life. It's not named after a character. His name is Barney, and he's just a mischievous little thing. Okay.
In your interviews, I've heard you say that sometimes you get so involved in your work that the only thing that pulls you away is your dog will come in and want to play with you, or say, it's time to eat.
Yeah, it's true. And Lily did that. She would sleep in my study, and then finally she'd wander out, to get her dinner, and my husband would give her the ball and say, go get her, and she'd drop the ball at my feet and look at me, She'd pick it up, drop it again, and look at me. And that meant, enough, you've got to leave now, and the writing day's over.
That's great. Do readers ever surprise you with their interpretations or ideas from your books?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that a novel, a book really, becomes itself. It becomes a real entity only when it's read. It is an entity for me. It's something, I don't even know what to call it. It's an experience for me to put all of this down and create this narrative, this story, this world. But it only comes alive in the mind and heart of the reader when it happens. And every reader reads it differently. And it's incredible to me to hear readers talk about my work and their interpretations or what they took from it. And sometimes they see it very differently. And I began to realize that, it exists in their mind as it should, and it exists in your mind as it should, because you're reading it through the lens of your own life. And so you read what you need to hear. You read what your heart hungers for. And people read it very differently. But I like that idea of it being read forward, so to speak. Yeah. And I learn a lot from my readers. Sometimes I had no idea that I did that, because you're writing unconsciously to a large extent. I had no idea, for instance, that I had created a symbolism of water and immersion in every one of my novels until a reader pointed it out to me. Actually sent me they had written a master's thesis about the water symbolism in The Secret Life of Bees. And I read it and went, well, I'll be darned. I didn't know I did that. So you're learning all the time.
It's got to be a great surprise. Yeah. Smarter than I anticipated. So students right now, I want everyone who's participating in 11th grade History Day to just raise your hand. Let's give Ms. Monk an idea of how many of you are currently involved in researching primary and secondary sources. So this is a wonderful thing. I was wondering if you could speak to us maybe a little bit about your experience with research, particularly researching at the Library of Congress for the book, The Invention of Wings, and maybe just give our students some advice on research or just share experiences.
I actually love the research part. It can be so exciting to do that because you're discovering new things. And part of the challenge for me is when to stop researching and start writing, because I researched The Invention of Wings, which is a book set in the 19th century and has a great deal to do with slavery in America. I researched that book for a year before I even started writing it. And I loved that year so much. I did go to the Library of Congress, and that was quite an experience to go back and, you know, they put on the white gloves and they bring these big newspapers out that were written and printed on little hand presses back in 1830. And you're sitting there reading what was written about our country trying to end slavery in 1935, for instance. And suddenly you come upon a letter written by your character in your book and what she actually said. I mean, I found that so exciting. And I spent several days in the Library of Congress just to get a feel for that time and reading newspapers and everything I could about slavery. So my research was to go to libraries, to read the diaries of Sarah Grimke, who is my main character, because you want, you know, your first kind of original research, and then to go to places like Boone Hall Plantation in Charleston or Middleton Plantation in Charleston and just walk the grounds and get a feel of what was going on. So you want the place, you want the libraries, you want the historic sites, you want to read everything you can. The thing that was most challenging for me about the research was reading about slavery. I mean, it was as bad as you learn about it, it was worse when I read about it and researched it because I did it so in depth. And I wanted to get that right so badly. I mean, it was intimidating to take on, you know, like, what are you writing? I'm writing about slavery in America. Well, who does that? And here I am, this white woman from the South, trying to say something about race and slavery in America. And I knew that was going to be tricky. And I wanted to get this right. And so I collected every book. I have shelves and shelves. Like, I read about 35 or 40 books just on slavery. But what was really the most important thing I read about slavery were the narratives of the slaves themselves. And there are some incredible slave narratives. Harriet Jacobs, there's just volumes and volumes and volumes of them. And to read this in their own words, much of it dictated to others who wrote it down, was the most eye-opening and heart-ripping thing I think I've ever read in my life. So I love the research. I'm glad you're involved in that. And the internet can be helpful too, but it's just a part of it.
And you also drew upon tangible objects. You studied the quilts, right? That were part of the invention of wings. Did you learn very much from those to help you write? Yeah? Yeah,
the quilts. You know, the thing about the slave quilts, they're called, I wanted my character to be able to tell a story. This is the character, I don't assume you've read The Invention of Wings, but in the story, my main character, her name is Handful. This is a nickname she has, Handful. Her mother quilted her story. Slaves could not read and write typically. It was against the law in South Carolina to teach an enslaved person to read or write. And so they needed to tell their stories. Every person needs some way to express what's inside of them. And so what I wanted to do was to say, she is going to tell her story with needle and thread, because this was a way to do it, and to do it subversively. And many stories of slavery were subversive. Most stories that have to do with race are. And so she subversively wrote a story by stitching it into a slave quilt. Now, where did I get this idea? Because in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and in the Smithsonian Museum, there are 3 slave quilts that have survived, and they are works of art. They are so exquisite. And they told a story in these quilts. Now, it wasn't really that subversive a story, but they told a story. And I was enamored by this idea. So I went to the Smithsonian, and they took me back in the archives to see this quilt I had seen in books and online. And they unfolded it. And there's the work. There are squares that tell these stories of her life in needle and thread. So instead of a pen and paper, so you can always find a way, to get your story out there. And that was why it was in the book.
Yeah, I think that's so great, because it shows just the wide range of research that's available. I mean, you find one particular thing you're interested in, and it can really lead you down a path of uncovering more about your story, or for our students maybe about their research, which is wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. That's what's so exciting about it. I just stumbled upon the picture of this slave quilt as I was researching, and I thought, oh, I have to have this in my book. And suddenly I had a character, and she was a seamstress, and it just gave the story a whole new element and dimension that wasn't there before, only because I was researching and saw a picture that I followed up on.
There's more to research than Wikipedia, right, you guys?
Oh, please, yes.
There's like a whole world. And libraries, remember, I asked my kids yesterday, how many of them had library cards? 3 out of 30 rose their hand. I was like, okay, that's your assignment for this week. Go get a library card.
Just a cue about Wikipedia. Someone came up, asked me a question once in an audience, and said, I understand your mentor is so-and-so. And I said, I'd never heard this name in my life. And they said, well, it said on Wikipedia that she was your mentor and that she had taught you this and this and this. And I said, well, I am so sorry, but I have never heard of this person. And sure enough, it was on Wikipedia that she was my mentor. I still don't know who she is, and I think we've gotten that corrected. But there's all kind. It had books attributed to me I didn't write. Just a word to the wise.
That's very helpful information. So I know that you have mentioned in previous interviews you try to live a contemplative life, spending time at monasteries, going on retreats, and making it a priority to be still and to be reflective. How does this reflective lifestyle influence your writing?
Well, for me, it's crucial. I think we're all, different in that sense. But I do think there is something in every human being that needs a still place. It's a place you can go to inside, and it's your sanctuary. It's the place where you're home, It's where your true self is. And you need to go there and get reacquainted with your true self and what you're about. That place is typically kind of silent and still and quiet. And we live in a world, I mean, come on, we're barraged by social media and by so many things, so much information, so many demands. We're in an information age, and you're getting incredible amounts of information. I mean, when I was researching, I found out, for instance, that in the Sunday paper of the New York Times, there is more information in that one New York Times than a person in the 19th century got in an entire year. Wow. It's amazing what our minds are trying to process all the time, and to emotionally deal with all of this. Not to mention just your own emotional life and trying to understand who you are. So how do you deal with all that? You know, for me, I have to find this sanctuary in myself, and I have to go there every day and spend at least 15 minutes, longer if I can, and sit with that. It's crucial for my writing because it helps me to find what I call the silence beneath my words. And I don't know how to explain that really, because when you talk about this place, it's very hard to put language to it. You can only talk about it poetically, really. But you have to connect to that place in yourself that you could call soul, or your true self, or what the quiet, still voice within, whatever you want to call that. And when you do, the language that comes out of you, the acts that come out of you, the words that come out of you are girded in something that's important. And I think it takes on a depth, a wisdom, a kind of knowledge that, you know, we need. And so it strengthens the work that you're doing. And I don't take what I do lightly. I mean, I realize it's almost scary to me that what I sit in my study and write goes into books that people actually read and are influenced by. All right, that's pretty awesome. I think about that all the time. And sometimes it's overwhelming. So I don't take lightly what comes out of me and I put out there. You know, I want to be, so that's why I'm sort of slow and let it age and be sure of what I'm trying to say out there. So I guess all I'm saying is that contemplative element is something to make part of your lives as you grow older, and it will serve you incredibly well.
Well, on behalf of all of the schools in attendance and the faculty, we thank you so much for joining us today. I think that we've all been, you know, we all have a lot to think about. And one more question, you guys. Just calm it down. Do you have any advice that you would give to our students, either who want to become writers or who are college bound? Any just words of wisdom that you'd like to leave them with?
It's always hard to pick one sentence of wisdom, you know, but I would say if you're interested in writing and literature, the most important thing probably is to read, and to read well, to read as much as you can all the time. And second of all, to go forth, whether you want to be a writer or not, and believe one thing, that inside of you is what I call your particular genius. It's in there. I don't care what you think of yourself, how poorly you think of yourself. We're so bad about that, you know, of thinking poorly of ourselves, of giving ourselves a hard time, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not loved, or I'm not this. But I'm telling you, inside of you, you've got a particular genius, and you've got a mother inside of you who loves you, and to cultivate this place that I was talking about earlier. There's so much more inside of you than you have yet discovered. And so go forth and know that, and it will give you a kind of confidence, and you've got everything inside of you you really need to overcome and to become what you were meant to be. And I'm excited for you that you have all of this ahead of you, and I hope you take it seriously, and I hope you find joy in the world, but I hope you give joy to the world too.
Well, thank you so much. Let's give her a hand.